Hi everyone. My name's Elena Cole. I'm 28, and behind my calm smile is a story I never thought I'd live through. One morning, I got a text from my mom. It said, "Don't call or come over. We're done." No explanation. No warning. Just cold words from the woman who raised me. I looked at the message, took a deep breath, and simply replied, "Got it." I turned off my phone and went about my day, quietly heartbroken but determined not to chase people who'd already let me go. But by midnight, my phone was buzzing non-stop. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of desperate messages. From my mom, from my dad, from my sister. Something had happened and suddenly, they needed me. It's funny how people realize your worth only when it's too late. Before we continue, don't forget to comment where you're watching from, like if you've ever been underestimated, and subscribe, because my next story will remind you that sometimes silence is the loudest revenge. I stared at my phone for a long time. The screen glowed in the dark, bright against the quiet of my apartment. The last message from my mother sat at the top of the screen. Is greater than, don't call or come over. We're done. I read it twice. My chest felt tight, but no tears came. It wasn't the first time she'd said something cruel, just the first time she'd meant it. My thumb hovered for a second before I typed two words. Is greater than, got it. Then I set the phone face down on the table. The sound of my heartbeat filled the silence. I didn't move for minutes, maybe hours. My whole life had been built around trying to make her proud, to hear her say something kind, something motherly. Instead, she'd said goodbye like she was closing a deal. Outside, the city hummed quietly. Cars passed. Somewhere, laughter drifted through the walls. I sat there in my small kitchen, the only light coming from the flickering bulb above the sink. The air felt heavy, like even it didn't want to move. At first, the phone stayed silent. Then, around 11, it buzzed once. A message. I ignored it. A few minutes later, it buzzed again. Then again. I finally turned it over. Is greater than mom. Please, answer me. Mom, it's important. Mom. Elena, please pick up the phone. My throat went dry. Her words looked strange, desperate, uneven. That wasn't like her. My mother didn't plead. She ordered. She blamed. But she never begged. By midnight, my phone was lighting up non-stop missed calls, voice messages, notifications popping up faster than I could count. The same number, the same name, Mom. Still, I didn't answer. Instead, I sat back and stared at the phone vibrating across the table, the sound sharp in the quiet room. I told myself this was what she wanted for me to disappear, to finally stop being the disappointment she'd always accused me of being. But a small part of me, the foolish, fragile part, wanted to believe something had changed, that maybe she was sorry, that maybe she'd realized how much her words had hurt. Still, I stayed where I was. It had started earlier that evening. Dinner at the family house, something I'd already known was a mistake. The air had been thick with tension even before I sat down. Mom's smile was forced, my father quiet as always, and my sister Tina scrolling through her phone, pretending to listen. We were supposed to be discussing the bookstore, my late father's pride and joy. I'd been taking care of it since he passed, trying to keep it running even though business was slow. To me, it was more than a shop. It was home. But to my mother, it was just an old building full of dust and memories she didn't want. I'm selling it, she'd said, cutting through dinner like a blade. I remember dropping my fork. What? It's useless, Elena, she continued, as if the decision had already been made. You can't keep clinging to the past forever. I felt something break inside me. That bookstore was Dad's dream. He built it from nothing. You can't just erase him because you're tired of remembering. Her expression hardened. Don't lecture me about your father. You didn't even know what he went through to keep that place open. Then let me keep it alive for him, I said, my voice shaking. It's all we have left. Tina sighed dramatically. Here we go again. Elena, you're always turning everything into a tragedy. It's just a store. Her words hit me like a slap. I looked at my father, hoping for support, but he only stared down at his plate, silent as always. Mom's tone turned cold. If you can't accept what's best for this family, maybe you should stop being part of it. I froze. What's that supposed to mean? She didn't answer. She just stared at me with that same disappointed look she'd worn my whole life, the one that said you're never enough. That's when I stood up, quietly. I see, I whispered. Then I guess that's that. I walked out of the house, feeling my heart crumble with every step. By the time I reached home, her text had already arrived. Is greater than don't call or come over. We're done. And I had replied, got it. Now, hours later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. The vibrations grew frantic, almost panicked. 57 missed calls, then 58. I finally turned the phone off, placed it beside the half-empty glass of water, and whispered to myself, I guess we really are done. But deep down, something felt off. A tiny, gnawing voice in my chest whispered that this wasn't just another argument, that something terrible had already happened. I just didn't know it yet. When I was little, my mother used to braid my hair every morning before school. She'd pull too hard, scolding me to sit still, and I'd bite my lip, trying not to cry. That was how our love worked, sharp, rushed, and always painful. My sister Tina would come in a few minutes later, still half asleep, and Mom's whole face would soften. Look at my beautiful girl, she'd say, her voice suddenly warm. I used to think maybe one day she'd say that to me too. She never did. Growing up, I learned how to stay quiet. It was safer that way. When I got good grades, Mom said I was trying too hard. When Tina failed a test, Mom said, she's just tired. No matter what I did, I was either too much or not enough. After Dad died, things only got worse. The day of his funeral, Mom didn't cry. She stood straight, her face calm, thanking people for coming as if it were a business meeting. I was the only one who couldn't stop shaking. I remember standing beside the coffin, whispering, I'll take care of the bookstore for you, Dad. He had built that place from nothing. It smelled of paper and hope. Every shelf held a memory of him, his handwriting on price tags, the old coffee mug he'd never washed properly, the clock that stopped working but was never thrown away. I went back to that store a week after his death. Mom didn't follow. She said she couldn't stand the sight of it, but I could. It was the only place that made me feel close to him. For 3 years, I ran it quietly, surviving on small sales and the kindness of neighbors. Mr. Hale, the old man from next door, came by almost every morning. He'd buy the same book over and over, The Old Man and the Sea, saying each copy felt a little different. I knew he was just trying to help me keep the lights on, but I never said it out loud. Mom and Tina rarely visited. When they did, it was only to tell me how empty the store looked, or how sad it must be to work there. Mom always made me feel like my life was a failure she didn't want to look at. Then came the argument. It started with a simple phone call 2 weeks before the dinner. Mom said she'd been thinking seriously about selling the bookstore. She said there was no point holding on to something that didn't make money. I told her she couldn't, that the store wasn't just a building. It was Dad's legacy. She laughed. A cold, bitter sound. You're just like him, Elena. Always living in the past. Always clinging to things that don't pay the bills. Those words stung more than I wanted to admit, but what hurt most was that she sounded almost angry that I loved the store. As if my love for Dad's memory was an insult to her. The next few days were silent between us. Tina called once, pretending to play peacemaker. She said, Elena, Mom's just trying to help. You're wasting your life on that dusty place. I hung up on her. That's how we ended up at that dinner, me. Walking into a house that had stopped feeling like home years ago, still hoping maybe they'd listen. Instead, it turned into another battlefield. Now, sitting alone on my couch, I kept replaying everything in my head, every word, every look, the way Mom's face had twisted with disappointment, the way Tina rolled her eyes like I was a child who'd ruined her night. I tried to tell myself I didn't care anymore, but I did. Even after all these years, some part of me still wanted her to look at me the way she looked at Tina, with pride, not pity. I reached for my phone again, thinking maybe I'd read one of her messages, maybe even answer. But my hand froze when I saw the last few texts she'd sent. Is greater than Elena, please. We need you. Something happened. My heart skipped. I blinked, thinking maybe I was reading it wrong. Something happened? I set the phone back down and pressed my palms against my face. I didn't want to care. I didn't want to get pulled back into their chaos. But that single sentence, something happened, stayed in my head all night. And even though I tried to ignore it, a quiet dread began to grow inside me, spreading like cold water under a locked door. The morning light felt wrong. Too quiet, too pale. It slid through the blinds, brushing across the pile of unopened messages still glowing on my phone. I hadn't slept a minute. My body was tired, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. I made coffee I didn't drink. I watched the steam curl and fade while those words echoed in my head. Something happened. For hours, I sat at the small table near my window, staring outside. People passed by, laughing, rushing to work, carrying normal mornings in their hands. I felt like I was watching another world, one I didn't belong to anymore. Finally, I turned my phone on. It buzzed immediately, dozens of notifications, all from my mother. Some were short, others frantic. Is greater than Elena, where are you? It's serious. Please come home. I can't do this without you. Then, one message that stopped me cold. Is greater than, it's about your sister. My chest tightened. I opened my call log, 58 missed calls, all from her. My mother never called me that many times, not even when Dad died. For a moment, I thought of calling back. But pride is a strange thing. It whispers that silence is strength, even when your heart is breaking. So instead, I got dressed and left my apartment. I walked to the bookstore. The air outside was sharp, the kind that wakes you up and reminds you how alone you are. The bell above the shop door gave its small, familiar chime as I stepped inside. The smell of old pages wrapped around me like a blanket. For a while, I could almost forget the noise in my head. I turned on the small radio Dad used to love and listened to soft music fill the air. But even the music couldn't drown out my mother's voice echoing in my memory. Her tone at dinner, her eyes, filled with something more than anger. Something closer to fear. Around noon, Mr. Hale came in. His gray hair looked even whiter under the sunlight, and he carried 2 cups of coffee, one for me, as always. You look pale, Miss Elena, he said kindly, placing the cup on the counter. Didn't sleep? I shook my head. Just one of those nights. He nodded slowly, studying me with those patient eyes of his. You know, he said softly, your mother's been calling everyone in the neighborhood this morning. My fingers tightened around the cup. What? He nodded again. Sounded worried. Real worried. Something's going on over there. I forced a smile I didn't feel. Probably another one of her dramas. She'll be fine. But he didn't look convinced. Maybe, he said quietly. But sometimes when people who never ask for help suddenly start calling, it means they've run out of lies. His words stayed with me long after he left. That evening, the sky turned orange and heavy with clouds. I was still behind the counter, sorting books that didn't need sorting, trying to fill the silence with motion. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up, expecting another message from Mom, but it wasn't. It was Aunt Margaret. Her voice came through low and uneasy. Elena, she said, are you home? I'm at the bookstore, I replied. Good, she sighed. Then listen to me carefully. Whatever happens tonight, don't ignore your mother, please. Why? What's going on? She hesitated. I heard her take a breath. Then she said, your mother made a mistake, and she's terrified you'll find out. The line went dead before I could ask another question. I stood there, frozen, the phone pressed against my ear, listening to nothing. Outside, the wind picked up. The old sign of the bookstore creaked softly, swinging back and forth as if the air itself was restless. I looked down at my hands and realized they were trembling. I wanted to believe this was just another family fight, another storm that would pass like all the others. But something about the way Aunt Margaret spoke, the fear in her voice, told me this wasn't that simple. By the time I closed the shop that night, my heart felt heavy with something I couldn't name. When I reached home, I sat by the window, the phone in my hand again. I scrolled to my mother's number but didn't press call. Not yet. For the first time, I didn't know if I was the one avoiding her or if I was afraid of what she might say if she answered. I just sat there, watching the city lights blur through the glass, as the quiet around me began to feel like the moment before a storm finally breaks. By the time I finally decided to drive home, the sky had turned black. The streetlights glowed weakly through a light drizzle, painting the road in gold streaks. My hands shook on the steering wheel, not from cold, but from everything I didn't understand. The whole drive, Aunt Margaret's voice played over and over in my head. Is greater than, your mother made a mistake, and she's terrified you'll find out. Every part of me wanted to turn back, to go home and pretend I hadn't heard those words. But another part, the part that had been ignored and lied to for years, needed answers. When I reached my parents' house, it felt different. The lights were on, but the air was too still. The curtains were drawn, and the front door was slightly open, just enough to make my stomach twist. I stepped inside slowly. The living room looked exactly as I remembered, perfectly clean, perfectly lifeless. But on the dining table sat a single lamp, lighting a mess of papers, envelopes, and what looked like torn documents. My mother was there, sitting alone, her back hunched, her hair loose and messy, something I'd never seen in my entire life. "Mom?" I said quietly. She looked up. Her eyes were red, her voice weak. "Elena." For a long moment, she just stared at me, like she wasn't sure I was real. Then she covered her mouth and began to cry. That sound, her crying, it didn't even seem possible. "My mother didn't cry," my mother commanded. She argued. She broke hearts with words sharper than glass, but the woman in front of me looked small. "Human." "I shouldn't have sent that message," she whispered. "I was angry. I said things I didn't mean." I stayed quiet. For once, I let the silence do the talking. She reached for one of the papers on the table, her hand trembling. "I thought I could protect you," she said. "I thought if you hated me, you'd stay away long enough for me to fix it." "Fix what?" I asked. She looked down at the floor. "Your sister," she murmured. "Tina, she's gone." My breath caught. "What do you mean, gone?" "She left last night," Mom said, her voice breaking. "She took money that wasn't hers, and the people she owes." She stopped herself, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter. She's in trouble, real trouble." I felt my pulse in my ears. My mind couldn't catch up. "What does that have to do with me?" Mom turned toward the table, her hands shaking harder now. She pulled out a torn sheet, part of an old loan document, and slid it across to me. My name was at the top. "Elena Cole." I stared at it, my voice suddenly gone. "Why is my name on this?" Her lips trembled. "Because I used your information," she said. "Years ago, when the bookstore was struggling, I put the loan under your name. I told myself I'd pay it off before you ever found out." My stomach dropped. "You what?" "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she whispered. "When your father died, there were debts you didn't know about. I didn't know what else to do." I took a step back. Everything in the room blurred: the walls, the papers, her face. All I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "So all this time," I said quietly, "you let me fight to keep that bookstore, thinking it was mine when really it was just a lie?" Tears streamed down her face. "I was trying to protect you, Elena. When Tina's debt collectors started coming, I thought if I pushed you away, they wouldn't find you. That's why I told you to stay away. I didn't want you dragged into this. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to breathe. You used my name. You lied to me. And now you say it was to protect me? She reached for me, but I stepped back. I couldn't let her touch me, not after everything she'd taken. Just then, the front door opened again. Aunt Margaret walked in, followed by 2 police officers. The air in the room shifted instantly. Clara, Aunt Margaret said softly. It's time. Mom froze. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I was going to tell her. I just needed more time. One of the officers stepped forward. Ma'am, we just need you to answer a few questions. I turned to Aunt Margaret, my chest heavy. What's happening? Her expression was full of quiet sadness. The loan company filed a report, Elena. They found proof your name was used illegally. Your mother confessed before you arrived. The room went still. I couldn't speak, couldn't even move. My mother lowered her head, her voice breaking. I never wanted it to reach you, she said. I thought I could handle it alone. I thought. She stopped, looking at me with eyes full of something I'd never seen before, real regret. I should have told you the truth long ago, she whispered. And for the first time in my life, I saw my mother not as the woman who demanded perfection, but as someone who'd built her whole world on fear and pride until it finally cracked. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, silent, as the truth I'd chased for years finally revealed itself heavy, ugly, and real. The next morning, sunlight crept through my window, touching the pile of unread messages on my phone. 53 missed calls, all from Mom. But I didn't pick up. Not because I hated her, though, for a few hours last night. I truly thought I did, but because my mind couldn't hold everything at once. Anger, betrayal, pity, confusion. They swirled inside me until even breathing felt heavy. I sat by the window for hours, watching the world outside wake up. Kids laughed at the bus stop. A neighbor watered her plants. Everything looked so ordinary, yet my life had split in half overnight. Around noon, Aunt Margaret came over. She carried a brown envelope, thick and old, and a paper bag with muffins that smelled faintly of cinnamon. She placed both gently on my kitchen table. Elena, she said quietly, your mother asked me to give you this. She's at the station right now, sorting out the paperwork. I looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. I don't want to read another lie. It's not a lie, Aunt Margaret said softly. It's her truth. Finally. The words stung a little. Truth. A word my mother had always twisted. After she left, I sat there for a long time before opening the envelope. Inside were several folded letters and one old photograph. It was a picture of Mom, much younger, smiling, holding a baby in her arms. But the baby wasn't me. My stomach tightened as I picked up the first letter. Is greater than Elena? If you're reading this, it means I've run out of ways to hide what I've done. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope you'll understand why I made the choices I did. Her handwriting was shaky, but it was hers. Is greater than, you were never supposed to know about Tina's father. I met him before your dad and thought I could start over when he left us. Then I found out I was pregnant with Tina. I was scared, alone, and foolish. When I met your father, he accepted her as his own, but I never told her the truth that she wasn't his child. Years later, when she found out, everything broke. She hated me for lying, and she hated you for having the life she thought she deserved. That's when she started taking money, running from people who promised her easy fixes. My fingers went numb as I kept reading. Is greater than, the debts she owes now are because of me. I borrowed to save her once, and when I couldn't pay it back, I used your name. I thought I was protecting both of you, but all I did was dig us deeper. I'm so sorry, Elena. I've spent my whole life trying to be strong, but I see now that strength means telling the truth, not hiding it. By the time I reached the end, the paper was wet with tears I hadn't realized I'd shed. I looked at the photo again, my mother smiling at Tina, and suddenly everything clicked. The distance, the arguments, the favoritism, the anger that always seemed misplaced. It all had roots in a secret too heavy for anyone to carry. That night, I drove back to the house. The lights were off, and the living room was empty, except for the faint smell of her perfume. On the table sat another small note, written on the back of an old receipt. Is greater than, you were always the better part of me. I'm sorry it took losing everything to say that. I sat there for hours, just staring at those words. For the first time in my life, I saw the woman behind the mother broken, proud, terrified. And strangely, even through the pain, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Understanding. As dawn broke, I realized the messages, the missed calls, all came from one thing: guilt. Not control, not manipulation, just a woman trying too late to fix what she had destroyed. I whispered into the quiet room. I got your message, Mom. I just wish you had said all this sooner. Then I folded her letters carefully, tucked them back into the envelope, and placed it beside the photograph. Outside, a faint glow touched the horizon. The rain had stopped. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of her words crushing me. Just their echo fading, soft, but real. And in that silence, I finally understood. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free, it simply lets you breathe again. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more.